Pope Leo XIV stood by the tall window, his hands clasped so tightly that the knuckles widened. On the desk behind him lay a letter creased, worn, and smudged from having been read too many times. It was a copy of the original message from La Salette, written nearly 2 centuries earlier, and yet every line seemed to speak of now. The headlines outside were relentless. Entire villages in the south swallowed by floodwaters, crops failing in the north, riots into European capitals, a banking collapse. But the thing that turned private whispers into trembling fear was the slow, undeniable collapse of faith itself. Churches once overflowing stood nearly empty on Sundays. Confessionals gathered dust. Priests left their parishes, discouraged and worn down. In the center of it all, one prediction from La Salette rang like a warning bell. Rome will lose the faith and become the seat of the Antichrist. Cardinal Bianchi, the Vatican Secretary of State, entered the room without knocking. His presence was as controlled and polished as the man himself, a face carved from stone, eyes sharp and calculating. "Holy Father," he began, "the press is growing bolder. They are using these prophecies to discredit the church. We cannot let this go further." Pope Leo turned slowly. His voice was calm, but there was something under it, an ache that even Bianchi could hear. And what if they are not merely words to be discredited? What if they are warning us, and we are proud to listen? Bianchi's lips tightened. "With respect, Holy Father, the church cannot be seen bending to old visions spoken to peasant children. La Salette is history. Our focus must be on diplomacy, stability. Diplomacy will not save a dying soul." Cardinal Leo cut in. His voice rose, then softened, as though ashamed of its own edge. "Do you not feel it? The coldness in the hearts of men, the empty seats in our churches, the silence of prayer where there should be a roar." Meanwhile, in the outskirts of Rome, far from the marble halls, Sister Lucia worked in a small soup kitchen built into the basement of a crumbling parish. She was old now, her back bent, her hands spotted with age, but her presence radiated a quiet strength that no storm could shake. She had seen enough of the world to know that faith was not in the gold of cathedrals, but in the cracked bowls she handed to the hungry. That morning, a young man named Marco sat at one of the wooden tables, staring at his untouched meal. His father's farm had been destroyed in the floods. He had lost his home, his work, and his will to pray. Lucia sat beside him without a word, letting the silence stretch until it became almost unbearable. When the fields flood, she said, "Finally, it is the earth's way of making us plant again. The flood is not the end. It is an invitation to begin differently." Marco shook his head. "And if I have nothing left to plant," she smiled faintly, "then God will give you seed from somewhere you do not expect." Back at the Vatican, another figure entered the unfolding drama, a woman few knew, but whose arrival would turn the tide. Her name was Maria Conti, a journalist known for her unflinching truth-telling and her unwillingness to bow to political pressure. She had come to deliver something to the Pope. Though she had no appointment, no introduction, she had simply walked through the rain to the bronze doors and refused to leave. When finally allowed in, she stood before Pope Leo, holding a leather-bound notebook. "Holy Father," she said quietly, "I believe the world needs to hear La Salette again. Not the softened version, not the censored parts, the whole message. If you speak it openly, with humility, it will shake the world." Bianchi, standing in the corner, nearly laughed. "Do you realize what you are suggesting? You would have us terrify the faithful with visions of apostasy and judgment. This is not." Maria turned to him, her voice firm. "The faithful are already terrified. They just don't trust you enough to admit it." For days, the debate tore through the Vatican. Bianchi argued for silence, for political caution. The Pope wrestled with doubt, fear of causing panic, fear of being misunderstood. In his private prayers, he knelt before the crucifix in the dim chapel, whispering, "Lord, if I speak, let it be your voice, not mine." Then came the night of the Vigil of the Assumption. St. Peter's Square was half empty, the rain still falling. But somewhere in that darkness, a sign came, not for the cameras, not for the crowds, but for those whose hearts were watching. It began with the bells, silent for weeks. They began to ring not by human hand, but as if moved by an unseen wind. And in the thin mist over the square, a faint figure seemed to appear, a woman in a white robe, a crown of roses on her head, weeping. Those who saw her could not move. Those who did not see her still felt the weight of something holy pressing. In the next morning, Pope Leo made his choice. Standing at the window overlooking the square, He read the full message of La Salette aloud, not edited, not softened. His voice was steady, but his eyes were wet. When he finished, he said only this: the church is not a museum for the perfect. It is a field hospital for the wounded. If we are to survive, we must first kneel, not before power, but before God. In the weeks that followed, something began to shift, not in the headlines, not yet, but in small, stubborn ways. Confessionals filled again, priests returned to their parishes, strangers prayed together in the streets, and in a small soup kitchen on the edge of Rome, Marco helped Sister Lucia serve bread, telling anyone who would listen, the flood was not the end. It was where God planted me again. The storm had started over the Tyrrhenian Sea 3 days ago, but by the time it reached Rome, it seemed to carry more than just water. The air was heavy, almost metallic, as if something in the unseen world had shifted. The rain came down in thin, unbroken lines, soaking the cobblestones, turning the narrow streets into shallow rivers. Inside the Apostolic Palace, Pope Leo XIV stared out from the window of his private study. From here, he could see the dome of St. Peter's glistening under the gray morning. Usually, the sight filled him with peace, but today, it was only a reminder of the weight on his shoulders. On his desk lay the old, brittle letter, a copy of The Secret of La Salette, the one he had read and reread every night for weeks. Some called it superstition, others called it prophecy. To Leo, it felt like a mirror, one that showed not his face, but the state of the church, and the reflection was not good. A knock on the door broke his thoughts. Cardinal Bianchi stepped in, tall and rigid, his black cassock perfectly pressed, the scarlet sash drawn so tight it seemed like it might cut him in half. He didn't bother with small talk. Holy Father, the media is circling like vultures. They are saying this La Salette business is the church trying to create fear to hide its failures. If we give it any more attention, we will lose credibility. Leo turned, resting both hands on the desk. And if we ignore it, Cardinal, if we pretend heaven has said nothing, what then? Bianchi's eyes narrowed. Then we remain steady. We do not feed hysteria. Our duty is to keep the church standing, not to throw it into chaos over something spoken to a pair of shepherd children in 1846. The Pope sighed. Do you know what I envy, Bianchi? The faith of those children. They saw the Mother of God weep, and they believed her. His voice caught. We have seen the world weep, and still we doubt. Bianchi's jaw tightened. Faith must be balanced with governance. Holy Father, a shepherd must guide his flock, not alarm it, far from the marble halls. In a district of Rome, where plaster peeled from walls and laundry hung across alleyways, like faded flags, Sister Lucia stood at the stove of the soup kitchen. The room smelled of boiling broth and fresh bread. Her hands were busy, but her eyes kept drifting toward the rain-spattered windows. The flood had destroyed more than houses. It had taken the little stability people clung to. The faces that came through the kitchen door each day told their own stories. Hollowed eyes, mud-stained shoes, the way some people held their spoons as if afraid the food might vanish if they blinked. A boy of 20 named Marco was among them. He had been coming for weeks, always sitting alone, always staring at his untouched food before finally eating. His father's vineyard had been swallowed by the flood, leaving nothing but drowned vines and black water. That afternoon, Lucia carried a bowl of soup to his table. She didn't sit right away, just placed it down and stood beside him. You've lost more than your home, she said gently. Marco glanced up, startled. How do you know? Because your shoulders look heavier than your hands, she replied. He let out a bitter laugh. What does it matter? Even if I still believed God was listening, what could he do? Give me back what I lost. Lucia pulled out the chair and sat beside him. When the land floods, it is not the end of the field. Sometimes it is the beginning of something else. Marco stared at her, confused. And if I have nothing left to plant, she smiled faintly, then he will give you seed from somewhere you do not expect. At that same hour, on the other side of the city, a woman named Maria Conti stood in the rain outside the bronze doors of the Apostolic Palace.